right, folks, let's do this. It is Friday, the 4th of July, 2025. Welcome to News Trap. My name is David Parsons. I hope you're doing well out there. It seems like you're not. I'm reading the sort of zeitgeist of my social media feeds, and it feels like everyone's like, how are we supposed to celebrate the 4th of July this year? How am I supposed to enjoy the barbecues and the fireworks and the pageantry of patriotism at a time like this, when there are ICE concentration camps being built and the parade of cruelty and inhumanity that the Trump administration represents marches on in victory, stomping out every fragment of hope for the future of humanity? Well, hey, I get it, but part of me wonders, how'd you celebrate 4th of July ever, really? I mean, it's sort of like a weird holiday. We've talked a lot about patriotism and nationalism as sort of poisonous ideologies on this show for a while. So part of me is always like, well, fuck the 4th of July. But the other part of me is like, well, no, it's kind of an important marker. And I think for people on the left, progressive people, whatever category you want to put yourself in, there's always a sort of icky feeling around the 4th of July. But, I need to rescue something of a sort of positive national identity or a positive sort of vision of what a nation could be at this particular moment. I always come back to something that I think you'll probably see posted everywhere today, always, on the 4th of July, is the Frederick Douglass, What to the American Slave is the 4th of July. I think that's what it's called. You can look it up. It's I first encountered that in Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. And I remember it blowing my mind and it honestly being an entryway into understanding an alternative vision of what the United States could and should be. It also sort of makes you bitter because it's such a statement of anger and sort of revulsion at the hypocrisy of a lot of American discourse around things like liberty and freedom, etc. I mean, how can you swallow any of that land of the free bullshit when there are ICE raids happening all over the place, and even the symbol of American freedom, like the Statue of Liberty, which is about immigration, right, primarily, it just all seems like a sad, bitter lie. But I wanted to think about drugs today. Like that, primarily drugs are going to be the subject of my entry into the 4th of July rants and ramblings that I'm sure are happening all over the place this particular 4th of July. Justin sent me some great screenshots, and I share those on the Screenshots news feed for anyone who is subscribing at that level. But I wanted to share these on the main feed because they connect to a subject that I've been thinking about for a long time. It's sort of the connection between drugs and a certain type of escape hatch, a certain kind of way out of the dominant mode of thinking in America. I remember when I was my first day of graduate school, when I was in the history department at the City University of New York, we were asked to go around the table and say like what we wanted to work on while we were getting these degrees. And I was sort of like, oh God, I hope the circle goes around the other way, so I'll have some time to think of something, because I didn't really have a project in mind. But the thing that popped into my head and what I actually talked about when it came my turn to speak was that I was interested mostly in exploring the connections between drugs and political activism in the 1960s and 1970s. I was particularly interested in the ways that LSD, popularly known as acid, had sort of crashed into a lot of American minds in the 1950s and 1960s and how that transformed or didn't transform the political and social and cultural realities. So these screenshots are about MKULTRA, the CIA mind control program, and I'll get to them in a second. But I wanted to think about drugs and counterculture at this moment because, you know, a lot of what the tone of people are talking about online right now is sort of like, how are we supposed to move forward? Like, how am I supposed to just live my life? What can I do? And that is something that is a constant refrain on the left, and people have been actually sending me, because I post so much just sort of the bad news on my Instagram feed, that people will send me stuff that's like, well, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And what do I do? How can I do something? And you know, as much as I sort of love the people who are involved in all kinds of activism right now, part of me also thinks that people on the left tend to put a lot of guilt and shame and judgment on themselves and on others for doing or not doing any number of particular political strategies or actions. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to think of the perfect political strategy to fight Trump or fight injustice, and that we have to be doing that all the time, and if we're not, we're doing something wrong. And I want to push back against that, because to me, this is part of what I want to connect to the idea of counterculture, the idea of creating a kind of different template for existence, things that are within our power, in other words, and not necessarily banging our head against the wall or even banging our head against a growing sort of authoritarian state that makes it very, very difficult to make change. And I say that while acknowledging that we still have a high degree of freedom in the United States. There's a lot we can do. And again, I want to sort of recognize the people that are doing cool stuff. Last night, I went to a bake sale, and it's sort of like, wow, a bake sale? Yeah, an immigrant defense bake sale that was happening at a hipster wine bar in town here in Ventura, California. There was a line around the block I rarely see that many people gathered for anything in Ventura, California. And it's just it is very heartening and energizing to see that there are lots of other people who are concerned and want to donate money or do something. And this all went to like legal defense funds, which is all necessary stuff. We're going to have to raise money for that. But there is this sort of like other idea of kind of like, how do we live our lives? How do we not be in despair all the time, feeling helpless against these really, really evil forces that are unleashed in incredibly ugly ways in our society right now? So that's the stuff I'm thinking about right now. And I wanted to share this MKUltra thing, in part because I want to remember that, you know, the drug counterculture at one point did have a particular kind of like left-wing charge to it, which is really sucks to think about in the context of like the Joe Rogan, RFK Jr., the way the counterculture is sort of like, I don't know, use the word hijacked, because I don't think it's that much of a conspiracy, but the direction of counterculture went into the Trump world somehow. And I want to rescue the idea that it doesn't have to be that way, that there are other directions. At the same time, we should recognize that these CIA LSD experiments were sort of like the opening shots of a war for the American mind. And it was like the military industrial complex that was in large part in control of these drugs and interested in their uses for all sorts of nefarious purposes. So let me read this piece that's about MK Ultra. This is about these are like sort of new revelations. I know maybe some of you have heard about the MK Ultra program before. I know we've talked about chaos and its connection to the Manson murders on this show a couple times. But this is an element of it that's connected to the sexual experiments. So I'm thinking about like sex, drugs, and rock and roll as those sort of like three pillars of the cliche 1960s counterculture. Those things matter because they are sort of gateways out. They are sort of spaces where human beings can be human beings, somehow divorced from all of those power games. Or am I fooling myself and thinking those things are divorced from the power games? I think that's the question I have. It's sort of like, where are the power games within this sex, drugs, and rock and roll counterculture? So check this out. The John had unwittingly become a subject in a CIA experiment focused on how drugs and sex might be used to obtain secrets from foreign adversaries. Part of MKULTRA, the agency's broader and highly controversial mind control research program, Operation Midnight Climax began in 1954. The experiments involved luring men into a heavily surveilled bordello, dosing them with LSD, and filming their reactions to probing questions and subliminal messaging. But it wasn't long before the research devolved into revelry. By the time the program was canceled in 1963, the project had become headquarters for what one writer called CIA carnal operations, where agents regularly took part in voyeurism, drugs, and sex. In the early 1950s, leadership at the nation's intelligence agencies became obsessed with the idea of mind control. As the Cold War heated up, concerns grew that the Soviets were making successful advances in psychological torture and even brainwashing. According to Stephen Kinzer, author of Poisoner-in-Chief, Sidney Gottlieb, and the CIA Search for Mind Control, two incidents in particular inspired this mind control hysteria, particularly at the CIA. The first was 1949's show trial of Hungarian Cardinal Joseph Mindszenty. Back in the United States, CIA officials watched the trial in horror, as a once ardent and outspoken critic of communism falsely confessed to espionage, treason, and conspiring against the Hungarian government in a mechanical and monotone voice. They thought it was something new, Kinzer tells Popular Mechanics, that somebody else was speaking through Mindszenty's mouth. Soon after the program began, its director, a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, arranged for the CIA to buy the world's supply of LSD from the Swiss pharmacy where it was discovered and dole it out to the projects taking place under the MKUltra banner, including what would become perhaps its most notorious, Operation Midnight Climax. Prostitutes were given $100 for each man they lured to the bordello, who were then unknowingly dosed with LSD in the cocktails they were likely pleasantly surprised to receive. With guidance from the agents, the women experimented with different lines of questioning at different points during the evening, working to determine when the men might be most susceptible to mind control. Eventually, these efforts revealed that a man became increasingly talkative if the prostitute asked him to stay a while, even after the sexual transaction was complete. Operation Midnight Climax was not scientific at all, Kinzer says. The guys weren't scientists, they weren't sex therapists or psychologists, they were sitting on a portable toilet drinking cocktails out of a pitcher. In fact, the operation seemed to be driven as much by the depravity of the CIA employees involved as by a national security need, with Gottlieb allegedly indulging in the services of prostitutes during his visits to San Francisco, and CIA officers volunteering to test the psychedelic drugs on themselves. Little of operational value emerged from the debauchery. Because of the program's top secret classification, as well as Gottlieb's efforts to destroy all documentation associated with MKUltra, it's impossible to know how many innocent people were victimized or harmed during Operation Midnight Climax, or the true extent of the experiment. Projects like Operation Midnight Climax may have disbanded by the mid-1960s, but the drugs the CIA imported for them were here to stay. Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter and poet Allen Ginsberg reportedly got their first hits of LSD from MKULTRA projects, and Ken Kesey, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and LSD Advocate, first tried the hallucinogen in a California VA hospital while participating in a CIA-run experiment, although he didn't know it at the time. So there's lots to talk about there. I love the name Operation Midnight Climax. Someone can use that for, I think, a good podcast name. But also the Grateful Dead connection, Allen Ginsberg and Ken Kesey and Robert Hunter. I was thinking that you can draw a direct line from the CIA LSD experiments of the 1960s to John Mayer playing the Sphere in Las Vegas to a bunch of stoned boomer hippies. That history is important, and the impact that drugs had and these CIA experiments had on American culture is something that's still with us in really, really powerful and dynamic ways. And so, in other words, I'm still going back to that first day of graduate school in trying to unpack drugs, counterculture, politics, because I think there's a real key there. And I think the fact that so many middle-class, white, boomer-type kids in the 1960s got into counterculture, got into sex, drugs, and rock and roll is in part a reaction to their upbringing in the Cold War, and they're feeling that they were caught in a nation that was expanding its horrific operations around the world in the same way that people feel today. In other words, that escape hatch, that sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing is still there. It's still, I think, a gateway, a pathway to understanding how people can wrap their minds around living life within such a really demonic and scary culture. And so I'm going to be doing a series of episodes this summer, so stay tuned for them. I'm calling it The Drug Trap. This is going to be on the subscriber feed because I don't want to necessarily talk about all of this stuff in public, but I want to reflect on my own relationship to drugs and alcohol specifically, and to think about how those things have intersected with my ideas about politics and my own sort of, I don't know, class and social position. Because I think those things are really, really key. And again, I think it's key to think about drugs and counterculture in a way that's not just Joe Rogan, whoa, man, everything's fucking crazy, man, strap in for the ride. Because I remember that the first maybe viral Joe Rogan moment was his description of doing DMT. And he was talking about looking at Los Angeles from an airplane. And he said, you know, if you look at LA from an airplane, it just looks like a big brown spot on the map. That's where human beings are coalescing because human beings are a virus. And I remember that little sound clip going around the internet. And it tells you a lot about sort of the mindset of the Rogan crew in their attitude towards humanity and what they see when they're on drugs. And so I think that, you know, we've matured as a culture a lot, maybe, since the 1960s. And it's not just the idea that, like, oh, everyone just needs to freak out and do drugs and we'll all be free after that. Because there were a lot, like, that was the Timothy Leary, tune in, turn on, drop out. In other words, their answer to the Vietnam War, their answer to the racism of American society was to do drugs, and hopefully if everybody saw what they saw, then we would all somehow get along and build a more humane society. Well, I mean, look at what happened to Burning Man, dude. Like, Burning Man just turned into like a bunch of fucking tech bro assholes partying out in the desert. It isn't exactly my vision of what life should be. And it certainly doesn't fall in line with any kind of like left vision, right? Like I used to think that Burning Man was like where the edge of the American left is. And that's just like a joke even for me to say out loud right now. So let's think about the kind of drug counterculture and how that might be steered. That's what I would like to think about. And again, I will be posting those drug trap episodes over the course of the summer, so check those out if you want to subscribe and listen. I appreciate it. But I want to share one last thing before I go here. And this is kind of my own version of the Frederick Douglass thing that everyone shares. I like to share this piece from Allen Ginsberg, who was mentioned just now during the MKUltra thing, because he is one of those people, writers and artists, who first experienced LSD through CIA experiments. I think I think Ginsberg, if I recall, I haven't read about Ginsberg in a while, but I think he accessed the CIA experiments through like answering an ad and going to like a Berkeley hospital. It was in the context of like psychological therapy. I don't think he knew that it was a CIA experiment, but it blew his mind and certainly I think added a kind of angle to the poetry that he was already writing. But this piece is a piece that I remember reading many, many years ago, and I can actually remember like gathering anyone who would listen to me and reading this out loud to them. You got to hear this, man. Like, I just thought this was the greatest little piece. It's called Poetry, Violence, and the Trembling Lambs, or Independence Day Manifesto. And it appears in the book Deliberate Prose, Selected Essays, 1952 to 1995. This is Allen Ginsberg. And when you listen to me reading this, I hope that you recognize how insane it is that Ginsberg is talking about the nation in this way in 1959, and how much it corresponds to the kind of reality we live in now. He's talking a lot about police states. He's talking a lot about censorship. He's talking a lot about mass communication and systems of like particularly electronic communication. He's sort of freaking out in the way that a person on, a social media network would freak out right now about like what's going on in America. But this is 1959, and the immediate context is that Ginsberg is responding to the censorship of poetry in San Francisco, particularly his poem Howl, which was literally like seized at the docks and entered into ultimately a Supreme Court case in which Ginsberg prevailed. But either way, he's writing in the context of that as well. And I just feel like, as I remembered this Independence Day Manifesto last night and read it again, I was sort of blown away by how this could be posted today. This is like a reminder that it's not just the 4th of July 2025 that's like a just sort of sad travesty. It's always been a problematic holiday. I can't even say problematic with a straight face anymore. But you know what I mean. It's always, the 4th of July has always been sort of like, ugh, really? We're going to celebrate this? Like, there's a lot of fucked up shit going on. But there's a piece of this writing, which again I'm going to read in a moment, where he talks about a sort of like alternative vision of America. And what even like a different kind of vision of what American masculinity could be. And as middle-aged white dude, that sort of means a lot to me, because the idea that there could be a different mode of being, that you could inhabit a different type of reality, and that's up to you, that seems very American too. And I don't know, I do think that's worth thinking about and celebrating. So here is Allen Ginsberg, Poetry, Violence, and the Trembling Lambs, or the Independence Day Manifesto. I will perform this for you now. Recent history is the record of a vast conspiracy to impose one level of mechanical consciousness on mankind and exterminate all manifestations of that unique part of human sentience, identical in all men, which the individual shares with his creator. The suppression of contemplative individuality is nearly complete. The only immediate historical data that we can know and act on are those fed to our senses through systems of mass communication. These media are exactly the places where the deepest and most personal sensitivities and confessions of reality are most prohibited, mocked, suppressed. At the same time, there is a crack in the mass consciousness of America, sudden emergence of insight into a vast national subconscious netherworld filled with nerve gases, universal death bombs, malevolent bureaucracies, secret police systems, drugs that open the door to God, ships leaving Earth, unknown chemical terrors, evil dreams at hand. Because systems of mass communication can communicate only officially acceptable levels of reality, no one can know the extent of the secret unconscious life. No one in America can know what will happen. No one is in real control. America is having a nervous breakdown. Poetry is the record of individual insights into the secret soul of the individual. And because all individuals are one in the eyes of their creator, into the soul of the world. The world has a soul. America is having a nervous breakdown. San Francisco is one of many places where a few individuals, poets, have had the luck and courage and fate to glimpse something new through the crack in mass consciousness. They have been exposed to some insight into their own nature, the nature of the governments, and the nature of God. Therefore, there has been great exaltation, despair, prophecy, strain, suicide, secrecy, and public gaiety among the poets of the city. Those of the general populace, whose individual perception is sufficiently weak to be formed by stereotypes of mass communication, disapprove and deny the insight. The police and newspapers have moved in. Mad movie manufacturers from Hollywood are at this moment preparing bestial stereotypes of the scene. The poets and those who share their activities or exhibit some sign of dress, hair, or demeanor of understanding or hipness are ridiculed. Those of us who have used certain benevolent drugs, marijuana, to alter our consciousness in order to gain insight, are hunted down in the street by police. Peyote, a historic vision-producing agent, is prohibited on pain of arrest. Those who have used opiates and junk are threatened with permanent jail and death. To be a junkie in America is like having been a Jew in Nazi Germany. A huge sadistic police bureaucracy has risen in every state, encouraged by the central government to persecute the Illuminati, to brainwash the public with official lies about the drugs, and to terrify and destroy those addicts whose spiritual search has made them sick. Deviants from the mass sexual stereotype, quietists, those who will not work for money, or fib and make arms for hire, or join armies in murder and threat, those who wish to loaf, think, rest in visions, act beautifully on their own, speak truthfully in public, inspired by democracy. What is their psychic fate now in America? And America, the greater portion of whose economy is yoked to mental and mechanical preparations for war. Literature expressing these insights has been mocked, misinterpreted, and suppressed by a horde of middlemen whose fearful allegiance to the organization of mass stereotype communication prevents them from sympathy, not only with their own inner nature, but with any manifestation of unconditioned individuality. I mean journalists, commercial publishers, book review fellows, multitudes of professors of literature, etc., etc. Poetry is hated. Whole schools of academic criticism have risen to prove that human consciousness of unconditioned spirit is a myth. A poetic renaissance glimpsed in San Francisco has been responded to with ugliness, anger, jealousy, vitriol, sullen protestations of superiority, and violence by police, by customs officials, post office employees, by trustees of great universities, by anyone whose love of power has led him to a position where he can push other people around over a difference of opinion or vision. The stakes are too great. An America gone mad with materialism, a police state America, a sexless and soulless America, prepared to battle the world in defense of a false image of its authority. Not the wild and beautiful America of the comrades of Walt Whitman, not the historic America of William Blake and Henry David Thoreau, where the spiritual independence of each individual was an America, a universe, more huge and awesome than all the abstract bureaucracies and authoritative officialdoms of the world combined. Only those who have entered the world of spirit know what a vast laugh there is in the illusory appearance of worldly authority. And all men, at one time or other, enter that spirit, whether in life or death. How many hypocrites are there in America? How many trembling lambs, fearful of discovery? What authority have we set up over ourselves that we are not as we are? Who shall prohibit an art from being published to the world? What conspirators have power to determine our mode of consciousness, our sexual enjoyments, our different labors and our loves? What fiends determine our wars? When will we discover an America that will not deny its own God? Who takes up arms, money, police, and a million hands to murder the consciousness of God? Who spits in the beautiful face of poetry, which sings of the glory of God and weeps in the dust of the world? Okay, so that is Allen Ginsberg in 1959. There are just so many eerie connections to our own moment in that piece, and I hope you enjoyed that, or at least got as much from it as I do every time I read it. LSD certainly did something to the way that Allen Ginsberg used language to express the historical moment he was living through. And I haven't really paid much attention to Allen Ginsberg in many, many years. I do have a poster of him that I'm staring at right now on my wall. That's a picture of him naked, with his hand holding his hand up, that says, "Can you pass the acid test?" And it's a Grateful Dead, Merry Pranksters, Ken Kesey event from the 60s, I'm assuming. Longshoremen's Hall and Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. Tickets are $2. The audience is invited to wear ecstatic dress and bring your own toys. I wonder, what's sad about that is it makes me think of Burning Man. It makes me think of the sort of like psychedelic culture and what happened to that as connected to all of the sort of helplessness that we feel when it comes to geopolitics, when it comes to stuff like, the big beautiful bill, or Netanyahu attacking Gaza, or all of the things that we feel sick about. How the psychedelic culture sort of seems divorced from that. I don't even know what psychedelic culture is anymore, honestly. And I think that, and I'll get into this in my drug trap episodes. At a certain point, I felt very connected to people who wanted to party and do drugs as a sort of mode of dealing with and a mode of creating a new format of human relation as an antidote and an answer to how shitty the world is, and a feeling that we don't have the power to change anything about it. But now I don't know where I'm at with all of that. But reading Allen Ginsberg's Independence Day Manifesto sort of recenters me in that part of me that believes there are things that we can do to represent and accelerate our humanity that aren't just fighting and feeling sick about what's going on. So that's my 2 cents on the 4th of July, 2025. I hope you're all doing well out there, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.